Chedeville sent me a bunch of their mouthpieces, and I got to try them, and I'm excited to tell you what I think about them.
My name is Josh Gu, and I'm taking my years of experience learning, teaching, and performing, and sharing all of my best clarinet and music tips so you can get more out of your practice, and most importantly, have fun. You can learn more about all of my many resources at quickstartclarinet.com, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit the bell to get notified when I post new videos.
Now, before we get started actually listening to the mouthpieces and discussing each individual model a bit, I want to talk a little bit about the history of the Chedeville name and give some clarity on that. So the Chedeville mouthpieces that I'm trying are from the modern day Chedeville company. There's a historical clarinet mouthpiece maker named Henry Chedeville who made quite legendary mouthpieces. There's also the sort of Caspers and the Chedevilles, and those were kind of the mouthpieces that were played by the previous generation of great players. I'm thinking of Robert Marcellus, Harold Wright, Ralph McLean. Those kinds of players were playing oftentimes on the Henry Chedeville mouthpieces or the Casper mouthpieces, and maybe a few others here and there, and I'm sure they tried everything like all of us clarinetists do, but these were really popular and really made famous during the early 1900s period. These modern Chedevilles are being made by a company and are kind of trying to sort of imitate and model that historical Chedeville sound. But they are not the historical Chedeville mouthpieces that I'm trying. They're new mouthpieces being made by the company. There's another cool and kind of unique thing that Chedeville does across all of the models of mouthpieces that I'm trying out, except for one of them, and that's that they have the same sort of model of mouthpiece in different tip openings. If you look at Van Doren or Bakun or D'Addario, oftentimes the model of mouthpiece is kind of determined by the tip opening. So if we think about Van Doren, they're the most well-known. You have the M13, which is a very closed tip opening, the M30, that's sort of medium tip opening, and then things like the B45 and the B40 lyre that are more open tip opening. With the Chedeville system, for most of them, the way that they work is you have, for example, the Elite model mouthpiece, but it comes in a tip opening of F0, which is closed, F1's a little more open, F2's a little more open, so on and so forth, up to F5, which is really quite open. Now with that in mind, the different tip opening models aren't going to be everything else is identical except for the tip opening, because that's just not how mouthpieces work. When you change the tip opening, you'll have to adjust facing length things, and there might be other internal dimensions that are a little bit adjusted as well. But it's really cool that if you like a more open tip, then you can play whatever mouthpiece and whatever kind of model and go after the kind of sound and playing characteristics of the specific model at whatever tip opening is generally comfortable for you. That being said, they did send me the Umbra model specifically in 3 different tip openings, and I'm going to play them just a little bit to give you an idea of how the tip opening actually can also make a significant difference even in the characteristic of the mouthpiece. So I have those 3 matched up with the Leger French cut reeds that feel about the right strength for that specific tip opening. So I'll play those back to back so you can hear how those different tip openings, even theoretically matched with the right strength reed, feels and sounds in the same model with the different opening. So you can hear a little bit how the different tip openings on the same mouthpiece are a bit different, and of course playing them on different reeds makes a difference as well, which brings me to my always equipment caveat that the equipment is only part of the factor, and a much larger portion of the equation is your input and how you're playing it. Yes, we want to find equipment that plays well with us and feels good, and after trying a ton of mouthpieces, there's definitely significant differences in how it feels to play different mouthpieces, but the end product that's coming out is always a combination between the equipment and what you're doing, with what you're doing having a much, much larger weight in that equation and making much more of an impact than the equipment. Now, with those equipment caveats out of the way, I want to talk a little bit about some general thoughts across every model, and then we'll play test and hear the distinctions between them. My first general thought is Chedeville has done a really fantastic job with their sort of marketing descriptions of these things. I'll talk about what each of them says as we go through the specific models, but I feel like they're extremely accurate to what my playing experience has been, which is awesome. They also are really, really fantastically in-tune mouthpieces, and I've really enjoyed playing on all of them. In fact, I've been kind of deciding which ones that I want to buy, and it's been a little bit difficult to decide because I've been bouncing back and forth between favorites each day as I play them, and as I get used to one, I really like it a lot, and then I try another one and I like it even more. So I actually had my wife help, so I'll include her feedback as well. So as we go through the individual models, I'm playing the F0 tip opening for pretty much all of them, except for the ones that either have a different numbering name or only come in one tip opening, which is the case for the Kanter Cinema. The F0 tip opening, or the one tip opening, is 100. So it's fairly closed, and I'm going to be playing it with the same 3.75 strength Leger French cut reed across all of them to sort of have that as a control, except for the Cinema, which I'll probably play on a 3.5. It's a 107 tip opening, which is still quite closed, but it works a little bit better with the 3.5, so I'll give it a fair comparison since it's a different tip opening on that. I also play tested these for my wife because I was having such a hard time deciding which one I liked, so I'll maybe share a few of her comments as well as we talk through each model. So without further ado, let's start up first with the Umbra with the F0 tip opening. So this one, the sort of fact sheet that they gave me, the information about it, they call this one the beautiful dark sound. It's made with the authentic Chedeville rubber. There's just one mouthpiece that isn't. All of them are made with the Chedeville rubber except for the SAV model, which we'll talk about in a few models and get more specific with that. But this is the authentic Chedeville rubber. It's sort of their dark sound one and is kind of a contrast to the Elite, which is kind of their bright, focused sound one. This is the beautiful dark sound mouthpiece, and I really think that it's accurate to it. Again, I think their marketing things are very accurate. This feels like a really rich, dark, beautiful sound. I absolutely fell in love with this one at Clarinet Fest in Dublin. In the big exhibit hall especially, it just had that like depth to sound and smoothness across the registers and ease of playing. So it was really, really lovely. I'm not sure if this one is my favorite. It's a very close, and again, I've been bouncing back and forth between all of them depending on which one. The drawbacks to this one for me is just a tiny bit of ease of articulation with the French cut reed and a little bit on the soft low notes, especially kind of tonguing the soft low notes. It gets just a little bit kind of fuzzy, stuffy, just ever so slightly down there for me. Again, on this reed, as I was trying it, for my personal tastes. My wife nicknamed this one the Laser, which I think is totally fitting because it has that kind of laser core to the sound and really fits good. This was her personal second favorite out of all of the ones that she was listening to me play. And I think this probably also ranks for personally my second favorite. Absolutely fantastic. Really like it a ton. And those are some of the sort of characteristics about it. Dark, full, rich core to the sound, nice flexibility, homogeneous sound across the registers, maybe a touch difficult on the articulation and response, but notes come out easily. It's just that articulation and that soft articulation in particular that it just takes a tiny bit of wrestling with for me on the Umbra. Now going to the other end of the spectrum, we have the Elite, and I'll play that so you can hear a little bit of that before I give any spoilers about how I feel about it. So this one is their clear, crisp sound is what they call it, and it's directly inspired by the vintage Chedeville mouthpieces that I was mentioning earlier. And the goal with this one is really all about like clarity, articulation, response, all of that kind of good stuff, which I think it absolutely does. It's also a good bit sort of smaller chamber to it and smaller actually outside of it, where I had to crank down the ligature to get it to fit, which is totally fine just compared to the Umbra is the widest out of them, the Elite's the narrowest, and it makes sense that that's sort of the two ends that they're going for. The Elite is that like clear, projecting, really pingy. The Umbra is that really dark, really round, really depth of sound, which is nice that they have that spectrum, and both of them have fantastic sort of response as far as getting all the notes to come out and getting the notes across the register to sound really nice and sort of even and homogeneous, which hopefully you're hearing in the scale. The Elite is probably my least favorite, which I think again makes sense since it's the kind of opposite end of the spectrum to the Umbra, which is one of my most favorites. I do love the loud projection to this. I don't know how well this will come across in the recording, but in the sort of clarion, when you really want to project with this one, it sounds fantastic. However, a little bit similar to the Umbra, the soft and lows just aren't quite there for me. It's really easy for it to get a little bit breathy. And I did try it on different reeds, and yes, maybe it's a little bit better on other reeds, but it still kind of has that issue to it where I have a hard time sort of controlling the beautiful softs on this. Now, if I could have the loud, strong projection of this with the beautiful dark roundness of the Umbra, and then having that clarity in the soft range on all of them, then maybe I'd end up with something like the SAV, which is the next one that I'll talk about. The SAV. So the SAV is marketed as kind of a combo between the sort of dark warmth of the Umbra and the sort of clear fullness of the Elite, and their sort of terms for it are warmth and beauty. But I think that it makes perfect sense, and I really feels that way to me as like kind of a combo of both. I feel like it has that sort of strength when I really push into it and I can really lean into it, and it has that great projection that the Elite has, but I also feel like it has the sort of warm depth of tone that the Umbra had as well. And it doesn't have the problem of the soft low notes. I feel like the soft low notes on this I can really make clear and warm and beautiful with good articulation. And like even in those soft tones, it still has a pretty good core to it and sounds really lovely. This one's also very interesting in the lineup. This one and the next one, the Kanter Cinema, are the most interesting, where I think I'm not 100% sure, but it seems like they kind of started with the Umbra and Elite and then are kind of branching out with the SAV and the Cinema. I know for sure the Cinema is the newest one, and is also very unique, which we'll talk about in a second. The SAV is unique in that it is not the sort of Chedeville proprietary rubber. It's just made out of kind of the standard German rubber, so more similar to kind of other more mainstream mouthpiece makers and mouthpiece brands that you might find. The interesting thing about that is that it makes it a lot cheaper. I'll talk maybe a little bit about pricing at the end, but all of the other ones are $350 and this one's like $220, so significantly cheaper. And this was my wife's favorite as well, beating out the Umbra ever so slightly. She said it really feels like it sort of matches my playing, which is kind of how I feel about it and is exactly what we want to be looking for in equipment, is something that sort of works with what you want, is easy to get what you want, and is easy to sound the way that you sound. Ultimately, we're going to end up sounding the way that we sound and playing the way that we play. So if the equipment is helping to sort of contribute to that rather than hinder that, then that seems like a good sweet spot to be in. The other little weird thing about the SAV in particular is the tip openings are named different. So for the Umbra and the Elite, the F0 or F00 are the most closed opening, and then like the F5 is the most open. The SAV just does it by numbers. So this is an SAV1, which is their most closed at 100, which is the equivalent to an F0. It goes up to an SAV5, which is the most open, and it's actually more open than like the F5 on the Umbra. So it's a little bit confusing, the numbering system and the tip opening system there, but it is nice that they still have it in the range of tip openings from quite closed to quite open as well. And last but not least, we have the Kanter Cinema, which is their newest model and is really fun because it was designed by Hollywood studio musician and educator and clarinetist, of course, and mouthpiece maker, James Kanter. I think he also goes by Jim Kanter, who's a great mouthpiece maker and helped sort of design this one. And before I talk too much more about it, let me play it first so you can get your own first impressions. The sort of marketing behind this one is very flexible, very versatile. With Kanter sort of being that studio musician, there's all kinds of things that you have to do, from sort of more pop styles to more classical styles, and they kind of designed this to have that flexibility in mind. And I think I agree with that. I found the sort of dimensions of it, at least on the exterior with like how much I had to tighten my ligature and stuff, quite similar to the SAV. Of course, it's a very different mouthpiece and has its own things, but I do have kind of a lot of the same things that I like with the SAV. It was really interesting as I was testing these over the past couple of weeks. I would sort of play one and I kind of fell in love with the Umbra. And then that same day I also played the Elite and really liked the Elite a lot. And then the next day as I was playing through all of them, I kind of fell in love with the Cinema actually, but then also liked the SAV a lot. And then as I've been playing on them more, it's sort of, I've shifted a little bit towards the SAV, but also really liked this one a lot. And then as I'm making this video, I'm like, the Umbra actually feels pretty good too. So it's really kind of bouncing all over the place as far as how much I like all of them. They're all really fantastic. But this one does have that flexibility to it, similar to the SAV, and that's why I grouped it that way. I feel like the Umbra and the Elite do their things really, really well. Like the Umbra has that really rich core to the sound, which is fantastic. The Elite has that projection and kind of like really good energy and ping, and the loud upper clarion and loud clarion in general is like so much power and awesomeness. The Cinema and the SAV, I feel like, do both things really well and are the more versatile mouthpieces. They maybe don't do them as well as the Umbra or the Elite, but they do them really well. I went back and forth between the Cinema and the SAV quite a bit. I really liked the sort of flexibility of both of them again. I did a practice session where I played on the cinema for like a full practice session and was feeling quite good about it. And I was like, well, maybe let me try the SAV just to compare. And to me, the SAV felt a little bit better. But again, this is on the Leger French cut reeds. This is me personally. And it was interesting because I feel like I can't find any faults with the cinema. I think the cinema does everything well, and there's nothing wrong with it, but maybe it does have a tiny bit of that like jack of all trades because it is so flexible and versatile. It doesn't have quite as much of that like characteristic things that I'm liking in the Umbra and the Elite, which I feel like the SAV does both of pretty well. So that's kind of where I'm personally standing on the Chedeville mouthpieces. Again, all of them were absolutely fantastic. Some general overall things, the $350 ones made out of the Chedeville rubber, so the Kanter Cinema, the Umbra, and the Elite, had probably the best intonation out of any mouthpieces I've ever really tested intonation on. All three of them really dynamite intonation and really easy to play in tune. The SAV maybe also has better intonation than most mouthpieces that I've tried, but not quite as good as the ones that are made out of the Chedeville rubber. I don't know if it has anything to do with the material that it's made out of. It's just maybe as a coincidence, but it was pretty clear that the Cinema, Elite, and Umbra, really great intonation. The SAV, really good intonation, but just not quite as good as the other three. But overall, really good intonation on all of them. Really good response, homogeneous sound across the registers, really enjoyable to play. And again, I thought I was hands down convinced that I was going to go with the SAV, but again, now I'm a little bit swayed by the other ones as I try them, which is a good sign that all of them have great appeal as I come back to them. And I think if you were going to get any of the Chedeville mouthpieces, I don't think you'd be disappointed. I think you would enjoy them quite a bit. And I really want to commend Chedeville for how clear and easy to understand their sort of marketing materials are. I don't think that there's anything that's sort of too fluffy or anything like that, whereas sometimes you hear things like, oh, this is going to be like a dark sound, blah, 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 and yeah, it kind of does that, but it's almost feels like a coincidence. I feel like with the Chedeville mouthpieces, they sort of have the whole spectrum covered, where you have the dark, rich, very dense sound with the Umbra. You have the bright, projecting, pingy, sort of fiery sound with the Elite. You have the Cinema and the SAV sort of filling in the middle. And actually, I would even say the SAV is filling in the middle. And then the Cinema is almost its own thing that kind of has a lot of flexibility to it, but does all of the things quite well. So that's the Chedeville lineup of mouthpieces. If you have any questions about anything like pricing, things like that, any questions about how I felt about them in particular, let me know in the comments. I will quickly say too, I tried them briefly with cane reeds. Feel great with cane reeds. Similar things as the Leger. The Leger French cut sort of brings its own aspects to it, and I can tell the French cut versus a cane reed, but the characteristics of the mouthpiece are intact whether it's with the Leger reeds or with the cane reeds. So that's the recap of the Chedeville mouthpieces. If you are interested in these, I absolutely don't think you could go wrong with any of them. They're doing really fantastic work, which is awesome. So let me know if you have any questions. Thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in another video. And last but not least, a huge heartfelt thank you to the Dennersons. This is like the Quick Start Clarinet family who supports the channel and helps to make everything that I do possible. If you would like to support the channel and get some awesome rewards in return where we can work one-on-one over video and you can have my full support moving forward on your clarinet journey, then go to quickstartclarinet.com/supporter.